All right, let's jump right into a really fascinating thought experiment. Imagine just for a second that we could actually transcend time and space and bring someone from 2,000 years ago right into our modern world. Well, the source material we're looking at today does exactly that. It sets up this incredible imaginative interview between Pastor Kim of the Madrid Sarang Church and the Apostle Paul himself. We're going to be focusing specifically on Paul's very first recorded sermon from Acts chapter 13. It is a brilliant way to explore these ancient texts, but with a really fresh, modern perspective.
So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll set up this interview across time. Then we'll ask, why a Jewish savior? Next, we'll look at the evidence of the resurrection, talk about laying down our modern laws, and finally, finish up with a specific message to the diaspora.
Okay, starting with section 1, an interview across time.
To really grasp the impact of Paul's message, which he delivered in the synagogue of Pisidia in Antioch, we have to look at the sheer physical toll it took just to get there. Paul and Barnabas were sent from Antioch to Cyprus. Then they crossed the sea to Pamphylia in Asia Minor. And here is the craziest part. They didn't exactly take the scenic, easy route. They scaled the incredibly rugged Taurus Mountains just to reach Pisidian Antioch, which sits at a staggering altitude of 1,100 meters. When you detail this grueling expedition, it really shows the intense effort and just this burning passion it took for Paul to bring his message to both Jews and Gentiles. This wasn't a casual stroll, It was a full-blown expedition fueled by absolute conviction.
Moving on to section 2, why a Jewish savior?
Now this brings us to a massive theological dilemma. Why should we, living today, believe in a Jewish Messiah from 2,000 years ago? Think about it. If the ultimate goal is global salvation, why did God choose one tiny nation, Israel, to bring a savior for the whole world? Our source notes that this was actually the timeless question that Gentiles, who were super familiar with Greek philosophy, asked Paul all the time.
And Paul gives this fascinating logical breakdown to answer it. Let's just look at the alternatives for a second. Scenario 1. Imagine God sent a savior with the exact same face to hundreds of nations simultaneously. You'd end up with hundreds of identical saviors running around everywhere. Talk about a strange situation. Or look at scenario 2. He sends a savior with a completely different face to every single nation. Honestly, that would be even worse. It would instantly spark endless controversies over who the true savior actually was. So by contrasting these two totally absurd hypotheticals, the source logically illustrates why God choosing just one single nation, Israel, to complete and then broadcast his plan of salvation to the entire world was, hands down, the most foolproof method.
All right, section 3, evidence of the resurrection.
So now we're shifting to the absolute core of Paul's message in Acts 13. His very first line of evidence? Well, it was the scriptures his audience already knew. He proved Jesus was the Messiah by pointing straight to the Old Testament, specifically Psalm 16:10, which says, "You will not let your Holy One undergo corruption." Paul basically explained that Jesus was the only figure in the entire history of Israel to fulfill this incredibly specific prophecy of a resurrected Messiah. But, this ancient textual evidence was really just the foundation. It perfectly set the stage for the hard, undeniable historical facts that he dropped next.
Because he absolutely didn't just rely on ancient texts. Think about the timeline here. Paul's sermon happened just 15 years after Jesus' ascension. So how could people believe in a resurrection they hadn't seen with their own eyes? Well, 15 years is way too short a time to fabricate a myth or a lie on that massive of a scale. The empty tomb was an undeniable physical fact. If it had been a lie, the Roman and Jewish authorities could have easily just produced a body to silence the disciples once and for all. But they couldn't. And on top of that, hundreds of living witnesses who had actually seen the resurrected Christ were still walking around.
It's honestly incredible to see the sheer confidence in Paul's challenge here. He essentially tells his audience, look, if you doubt Jesus' resurrection, please go ask your relatives and acquaintances down in Jerusalem. Verify the full story with the people who actually witnessed it. He is not asking them to take some blind leap of faith. He's actively urging the audience in Antioch to go investigate the historical facts for themselves.
Which leads us to section 4, laying down modern laws.
So, what does the good news of Jesus' resurrection actually mean for us today? This is where our source material perfectly bridges that 2,000-year gap. Back in the day, the ancient Jewish obsession was with the Mosaic Law. They believed that strictly keeping those ancient rules was literally the only way to prove their worth and stand clean before God.
Now today, we obviously might not use the term law Moses, but let's be real. We are just as obsessed with our own modern laws. We use our academic background, our wealth, the number of likes we get on social media, and this constant exhausting need for the approval of others as our new standards. We use all these metrics to desperately try and prove our self-worth, basically telling ourselves, if I achieve this, then I'm valuable.
And that brings us to a really profound redefinition of a very old word. Based on the source, we can actually define the biblical concept of sin not just as breaking a bunch of rules, but as the endless frustration and the state of failing to meet these impossible standards and laws we create to justify our own value. It's the absolute despair of relying on human effort and self-proof to feel valuable. When we inevitably fall short of these crushing modern laws we built for ourselves, we fall right into despair.
So, what's the solution to this endless cycle? Well, justification comes entirely from grace and faith in the resurrected Jesus, not human effort. That is the beautifully relieving gospel message that Paul delivered. God acknowledges us and saves us exactly as we are. You don't have to earn your value through your resume or your bank account or your social media presence. This truth absolutely breaks that endless, exhausting cycle of constantly trying to prove ourselves to the world.
Finally, Section 5, a message to the diaspora.
This brings us to a deeply personal question. If the Apostle Paul stood at the pulpit of our church today, 2,000 years later, what exactly would he say to us? Well, he'd look out and see a modern diaspora, Korean immigrants, students, and workers living in Spain. The source notes that Paul would absolutely validate their emotional and practical difficulties. He gets the reality of living in a foreign country, experiencing intense loneliness, navigating identity confusion, and spending your youth in a completely unfamiliar land.
And he gets it, because Paul himself was a wanderer. Listen to this absolutely beautiful quote from the Transtemporal interview. "I have spent my entire life as a sojourner. You are the very fruit of the gospel I preached 2,000 years ago." Paul uses his direct empathy as a fellow wanderer to highlight just an incredible truth. It is a literal miracle that this church in Spain, filled with people from Korea, is the living, breathing result of his ancient mission that kicked off 2,000 years ago in a tiny synagogue in Antioch.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to challenge you. What laws are you trying to prove your worth with today? What are the modern burdens, the specific certifications, or the societal achievements that you feel you absolutely must have to be considered a valuable person? The source challenges all of us to take those heavy burdens and just lay them down at the cross. I want to leave you with this final, powerful conclusion from our interview with the Apostle Paul. He urges the modern diaspora, and really all of us watching today, stop trying to prove your worth. You are justified by the risen Christ. Stop being weighed down by the impossible standards of the world. Lay down that exhausting need to prove yourself, and instead step into your daily life confidently as a witness of that grace. It leaves us with a final, really profound question to wrestle with. If your worth is already completely secured and proven by the resurrection, who would you be and how would you live your life tomorrow if you truly stop trying to prove it? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the big questions, and I'll see you next time.